Hello everyone. In this video, we'll be talking about the Xenos army factions that I don't play in 40k. My quick little rundown and thoughts of them, similar to the previous videos. The only faction that will not be talked about in this video will be the Leagues of Votann, since I have at least one game of experience playing them. But I hope you guys enjoy. Now starting off, we give my brief thoughts about the Aeldari. Overall, I think that their models look really good, especially the newer ones. Since their model update, since their codex release, I do think the Aeldari do look pretty cool. As a faction, they're basically just space elves. That's the best way to look at it. But when it comes at, do I have any interest in playing them? Not really. Their army rule seems, I wouldn't say complicated, just very particular and a little out of the way. A little too out of the way for my tastes. Also, I don't have a particular Eldar subfaction I like within the Aeldari, whether that be the Ynnari or the Craft World Eldar or what have you. It's sort of a similar problem with Space Marines, where it's man, I like Space Marines and I want to play them, but I just don't know what chapter I would kind of hone in on to play them. But this is my quick rundown of my thoughts on the Eldar. Next are their darker, more edgier cousins / siblings, and that is the Druhkari. Overall, same thing. Similar thoughts to the Druhkari models as the Eldar. I think that they look they do look pretty cool, especially the newer updated models. I'm not a fan of their aesthetic overall, which that sounds funny coming from someone who likes Chaos Space Marines. But overall, with the Druhkari, don't really care for their aesthetic too much. And like the Eldar, they're basically space dark elves, right? That's the best way to look at them. And likewise with their, with the Eldar, I don't have any interest in playing the Druhkari at some point. This is primarily due to I don't like their army rule. My friend Tyler, who's newer, getting into Warhammer 40k, he said something that was kind of funny that I didn't think about until thinking about it. Was the Drukhari's army rule is kind of like a very minorly cut, or majorly cut back version of the Sororitas's army rule. Now, yeah, that's not entirely accurate, because the Sisters of Battle can just with their miracle dice change one dice roll to whatever that miracle dice was. That is true, but there's that. And overall, of their models, I'm not the biggest fan of them. I really don't like how they look. So, there's that. And then they're also kind of squishy. They're basically like the Eldar, just different. This is the best way I can sum them up from my little knowledge of them. Next will be the Genestealer Cults. Overall, the Genestealer Cults, I do like their models look good, but it's very much a hit or miss kind of thing, because some models it's ooh, I really like how that looks, right? Whether you have the the 3-armed Genestealer Cult cowboy looking models, and then you have your patriarchs, or your pure blood or pure strain Genestealers, which are very Tyranid looking. But then there are some where it's I just don't like how they look. There are some where it's okay, cool. It's like a Genestealer version of a guardsman and what have you, or an ogre, and it's okay, that's cool, fine. And then it's very particular, right? It's more of, I like their models look neat. They look, generally speaking, pretty cool. But there are just some that are very, I don't really care for. I do think of them as a Tyranid light army, which is kind of the way to think about it, because they are technically a subfaction of Tyranids. And they can be allied into Tyranid armies, or Tyranids can be allied into their army, especially with the Final Day detachment. I do know that of the armies that you can collect, Genestealers are one of the more expensive ones to collect. If I remember correctly, they're either their combat patrol or their old battle force or boarding action box was a really good way to collect a bunch of them, and just you buy a bunch of those boxes, and you can do that. As an army to try, I don't think I'm gonna try Genestealer Cults anytime soon. Yeah, I know I can try them through Tabletop Simulator and not have to spend the money to to really get into it for them. But just as a faction, I'm not really interested. I don't really care for their army rule. Not that it's complicated, just more of it seems whatever to me. I'm not a fan of just their data sheets. Yeah, and like if I wanted to play Genestealers or something close to it, I would personally just play Tyranids. Moving on will be the Necrons. Now I have a lot that I can say about the Necrons. They are the faction I have played against the most. Overall, I think that all their models, even their older, not updated yet models, look really good. Like, really cool. Their overall aesthetic is really good. I said this before in my Necrons exclusive video, where I really like how their models look. I really like their lore. The lore is definitely interesting. They have a lot of interesting characters. They, are one of the main pivotal, factions in the War in Heaven. Overall, like, just all that stuff, they're really good. And like I said in my standalone video about the Necrons way back when, if I didn't start with Space Marines and move to Chaos Space Marines, I probably would have ended up started with either the Necrons or the Leagues of Votann. And from what my friend Brody has shown me, because he actually collects them, like collects Necrons physically, and has put them together and painted them. They seem like such a pain to paint at times and to assemble because of just kind of how overall spindly their models are. And if you are painting like a Catan shard, it's very like particular. You have to get with the details and like how you have to get the brush. I I don't ever look forward to to doing that. So I think if I were to play Necrons, I would probably collect them, assemble them, but maybe not paint them. That's how I think I'd go about it. But overall, like with Necrons, I like them as an army. I would, if I didn't start Space Marines, I would have started with them. Do I at some point want to play Necrons? Yeah, absolutely. They are definitely one of the armies where it's like they're on the list of, hey, after Chaos Space Marines and whatnot, I would probably pivot to this. They're on the list, like the good list. They're also on the shit list because I don't like fighting them. They are kind of cringe to fight and hard to kill. But what can you do? They're the Necrons. They're the space liches, space skeletons, and all that. Next we the Orks and the bestest boys. I've made a standalone video talking about the Orks from my giving first impressions of fighting them one time. Similar to the Imperial Guard. They're a faction that I would love to play. But just in terms of like playing and collecting their models physically, that is an incredibly expensive prospect to play. And it's not like, oh, I don't like their rule and everything. I like the Orks are fun. I've played against them. I've read their rules up and down. I've list built. I've tried to like get some things get together. The Orks are fun. They're a fun army to play as and play against, and kind of that's regardless of how you or your opponent's rolling that game. And I'm sure, I'm fairly confident when playing Orks, they're a fun army to play. Yeah, obviously you can do something that's really gonna just screw you over and kind of put you in a bad spot. But that's with any army. You could do that of any faction and that not be something like, wow, exclusive to Orks. I know that with Orks just as a faction, their characters do tend to be more comic relief and or funny. Yeah, they're still Orks. They're still, these, big bad green boys who want to, fight and win. And even if they lose, it's still winning because they got a good fight, kind of thing. And yeah, and especially when you look at anything, from any media of 40K from the perspective of the Orks, it's always going to be kind of goofy. It's always going to be kind of funny. And it's just like, this is 40K? But it's Orks. They're kind of funny guys. Next off is the Tau. Now, I overall think the Tau model range looks really good. It's very Gundam-esque. And there's definitely an appeal there visually. They similar to the Leagues of Votann, have a very traditional sci-fi aesthetic. I know from my one and only experience fighting the Tau, like I said in my first impressions of the Tau video, they shoot pretty good. and their melee is pretty bad. They are really, really bad at melee. Now, I'm also saying this with my experience against the Tau being before their big army rule change happened in one of the more recent data slates. I know that their shooting is better now because their army rule got changed. I know their melee is still really bad because that didn't get adjusted at all. And I think that's fine. I think on the point of Tau having bad melee, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, it sucks when you happen to be playing Tau, or you're playing Tau and you happen to fight an army that is more melee oriented or is entirely melee oriented. Like, yeah, Tau versus World Eaters. That's probably going to be a rough matchup for your guys when they inevitably get jumped. Tau into Space Marines, same sort of thing. When your battle suits eventually get thrown into melee combat with some Terminators or Blade Guard veterans, yeah, they're probably going to get hurt. They may die, and they may not kill anything in that fight. It is what it is, and I think that's just kind of to be expected. It's fine. Every army has their weak points and their strengths. Tau, their strength is shooting. Their weak point is melee. At some point, I do think I'd play a Tau army. I don't know how I would lean into it. I don't know if I'd lean into battle suits and breacher squads and have like some devilfish and whatnot. I don't know if I'd just do the meme and just have a nothing but Kroot army, which I know you could definitely do because they have a detachment. The Tau have a detachment that's all about just using Kroot. But overall, the Tau as a faction, yeah, they are an army where at some point I'd play them. I overall don't have too many gripes and complaints about them. Similar to my feelings about the Orks, and then next off with Tyranids, they're a fun army to fight. I know that there are sometimes in some cases where they will be unfun to fight, but I think that just boils down to, hey, they're unfun to fight because you mispositioned stuff. You didn't hide things away to get out of line of sight, or your opponent was just really good at moving things up around the board and getting good sight lines. That's how I look at it, and I don't think there's an inherent problem with that. Next off will be the Tyranids. From my experience, having fought them being the army I fought the second most, they are one of the funner armies to play against. Yes, I do say that with regards to Norn emissaries and psychophages and Carnifex bricks with being led by Old One Eye. Those can be kind of hard to deal with if you don't have the right tools or units to really answer those problems. But overall, even with that being said, the Tyranids are not an entirely unfun army to fight. I know that they can be made unfun to fight if you just do big monster spam with Norns and Carnifexes and Psychophages and what have you. I know that can make it unfun, but that's not any different than any other army. Just as an example of Space Marines, if I wanted to make an unfun Space Marine army to fight, it'd just be oops all tanks or oops all dreadnoughts. That may not be very fun to fight if you don't have a lot of ways to truly answer those problems. Overall, with the aesthetic of the Tyranids, although they may not be my biggest, I'm not the biggest fan of the Tyranids, and I wouldn't have picked them as one of my first factions to really jump into 40k with. I do think that their models and their units look really cool. And I think that, with that, you can paint them kind of interestingly. Obviously, you can follow the general paint scheme of High Fleet Leviathan or Behemoth or Jormungand or what have you. But they have an aesthetic. You look at a Tyranid and you can go, yeah, that's a Tyranid. I can clearly recognize a Tyranid warrior from a Hive Lord or a Norn emissary and whatnot, or a Termagant compared to a Neurogaunt sort of thing. And to that point, the whole concept of them being the numberless, all devouring spacebug faction, it makes sense. I mean, for every sci-fi setting, right? Every sci-fi universe, every sci-fi setting has its own all devouring, numberless faction. Whether that be, the Flood from Halo or, the Tyranids in 40k, there's going to be that faction that's just this without numbers swarm. And it's kind of like an unending tide. You kind of can't stop it. It's just trying to figure out how to slow it down or redirect it. Moving, talking about their, kind of briefly talking about their data sheets and profiles, they hit surprisingly hard. I know when I was fighting the Tyranids in the beginning, they just kind of took me by surprise. Like, I knew from Space Marine 2 and whatnot that, yeah, Tyranids can be kind of scary and they can hurt, especially in swarms. And I came at it from that perspective of, like, yeah, the game kind of told me, hey, Tyranids on tabletop are probably going to be a swarm-heavy army. Some other things may end up hitting harder than you'd expect. Be aware of that. And then getting into the tabletop and playing against Tyranids, it's like, wow, they like that's not untrue. You know, Termagants and Hormagaunts don't hit hard, but man, they're annoying when you get something kind of bogged down by Gaunts, and then you struggle to deal with that. Not because they're killing your guys, but because your guys are stuck in combat with them on top of whatever that they were already stuck in combat with, like Carnifexes or Warriors or Death Leapers. And so it you know, it's a compounding kind of thing. It's very easy for you fighting a Necron army to just get a little overwhelmed with what is being thrown at you. And that's not to say that you don't have the tools to deal with it. It's just more of like, hey, you're fighting an army that's going to have more bodies than you, or should have more bodies than you, similar to Orks. And their shooting and melee do hit hard, right? Tyranid warriors with their ranged weapons can hit real hard with their shooting. Same thing goes with the melee. Their melee weapons may not be like necessarily like the most ooh ah kind of thing, like a Thunderhammer or Power Fist, but they can still hit sufficiently hard for what they do. And that even extends when we start going up the ladder when we talk about Carnifexes, Norns, Trigons, Raveners, Lictors, the Von Ryan Death Leaper. You know, when you start moving up the totem pole, things get kind of rough. You know, when it comes to looking at their data sheets and just, man, they hurt. I know from what I've read, most of their data sheets seem kind of or not data sheets. Most of their detachments seem kind of lackluster. I know from my personal reading of them, and also helping my friend Tyler get into 40K and figuring out what detachments and what armies he would probably want to like really play. Assimilation Swarm is one of the detachments that I personally would want to play. Now, when I say like most of the detachments seem lackluster, I'm not saying necessarily that they are bad. Just that on the whole, they seem disappointing, right? Or they just look a little disappointing. And that's where I'm getting at it. I'm not trying to say they're bad. I'm sure there are some detachments that are objectively worse than others, but that's the same case of any faction. But with that, guys, that'll be the end of the video. You know, appreciate you guys watching and sticking around to the end. Feel free to comment down below what your thoughts are on any of the Xenos armies, whether you play them or you've played against them. You know, what kind of experiences have you had playing against these different armies? That even includes the Leagues of Votann, which I didn't include in this video because I've already played them. This is a video about armies I haven't played or played against, or well, haven't played more. You know, of course, let me know in the comment section down below if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. With that, guys, hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys are having a great time wherever you find yourself. And if you're not, well, I hope things can turn around, and I hope my video can help you with that process. But until the next time, guys, I'll see you later. Peace.